We are progressing our recording. Good morning. So we're gonna. This could be a shiur on Lech Lecha, Vayera, Chaye Sarah, or Toldos. So I picked it here because the starting point will be the beginning of our parsha. But when we do something interesting, sort of like, as you know, I like to examine the text up close and to really pay attention to, I don't know if you call it anomalies, but just sort of very careful reading of the text. And this, we're adding a little bit of psychological flair to it. And a lot of space. So I came across this book a couple of years ago it's called Wrestling Jacob. Obvious, good name, right? I'm not sure what the artist was thinking. So Shmuel Klitzner, it's an amazing family. Shmuel Klitzner and his wife, so she wrote a book called Subversive Sequels in Tanakh, which is also phenomenal. He wrote this book on Jacob, phenomenal. They're all trained in like the Nechama Leibowitz, Midrashet, Lindenbaum type of thinking. But their son, I met their son because he works for AIPAC in Israel. And he is like when he runs like the AIF tours in Israel. So for students, congressmen, whatever. So he's also like a phenomenal family. All right, yeah, Judy goes by Judy, right? Judy Klitzner. So anyway, so there's a lot of it. I remember seeing this, and I wanted to bring it back to light. I have zero original things to say. I just like to share other people's brilliant Torah because we're here to share and share alike. So if you have the Chumash, so we'll start. Our departure will be on page 124, the beginning of our parsha of Parshas Toldos. Toldos is a very, very challenging parsha because we're automatically introduced to Yitzchak and Rivka, and they have this interesting relationship where they're together, they're not together, they're on the same page, they're not on the same page. They're fighting with each other, but they're praying for each other. We start off with their struggles, and they have these two children, and right away we're told this very, very unusual situation where she has difficulty in the pregnancy. She seeks advice. It's unclear, according to the Ramban, she never tells her husband that she had this problem or that she sought advice on it. And then we have the two like diametrically opposed figures introduced to us, Yaakov and Esav. Yaakov good, Esav bad. That's the way we're always taught in school. Yaakov good, Esav bad. And he's he's tmemistic. He's Tom. He came out of the womb. He was already saying Tehillim, and Esav is hairy, and he's and he's already an animal. And he's like a murderer out of the womb. But the difficult thing that comes out is, and it says that when they're born, it says Yitzchak likes Esav. He loves Esav because he feeds him, and Rivka loves Yaakov. So right away, right there, we're set up for disaster. We're set up for like, this cannot be good. Now, we do see an indication that Yaakov has strong feelings that Yitzchak has strong feelings for Yaakov, but we never find those strong feelings that Rivka has for Esav. And then, of course, the whole ruse with the brachas, and she engineers a ruse by which she will have one son pretend to be the other son to deceive her husband, his father, on purpose, and get away with it, sort of, kind of, and then cause one son to want to murder the other son. I mean, wow. So you can wonder why we'll delve into the psychology here. We're not even going to go into that. We're going to talk about the psychology more of Yitzchak Avinu. Yitzchak kind of gets passed over. He's the bridge between Avraham and Yaakov. Yitzchak doesn't do very much. He's always known as the most passive of the avos. Things happen to him. The Akedah happens to him. His wife is found for him. He digs the same wells that his father digs. He gets the same predicaments that his father does. And he's blind. Literally in this part, he's blind, but it's also very figuratively. He's kind of blind to what's going on around him. So is Yitzchak some sort of, bumbling, like buffoon type? No. I actually once had someone try to convince me that Yitzchak was special needs, and that he had no mental capability comprehension. I don't subscribe to that. But Rav Hutner, and quoting in Pachad Yitzchak, according to the Maral, famously stated that, to be one of the avos, you don't have to be a marquee type of individual. You don't have to have your name on the front and center all the time. You could be sort of, if you could bridge the gap from generation 1 to generation 3, that's worthy of being one of the avos. So there are many ways of looking at that. But we're going to look at Yitzchak's persona particularly after the most difficult and troubling episode of his life, which I don't think anybody would argue is what probably shaped his whole character, is the Akedah. The Akedah. I mean, so we're going to look at that carefully, but it starts off here in 124. Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holidus Yitzchak. Now, right off the bat, you're saying like, wait a minute, this is really weird. This is really weird. It's weird. Why? It's weird because, first of all, if we're talking about the progeny of Yitzchak, what seems to be shaping the life of Yitzchak? It's the dominance of Avraham here in the pasuk. These are the generations of Yitzchak ben Avraham. Avraham begat Yitzchak. Now, we know like that part of that sentence is unnecessary. You could pick which part. Now, if we would look at other places, now of course Rashi says, we know Rashi because people thought that Avraham wasn't his father. Okay, fine. But if you look at, let's say, other structures, so I'll just give you an example. You don't have to turn to it, but it doesn't follow the usual structure of the Eila. So, like for instance, in Noach, Eila Toldot Shem ben Ma'ashana v'Yoledis Arbachshad Shnasai Marach Marbul. These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and he begat this one. And then Shem, after that, he lived so many years. If you look at again, it goes on and on. And Eila, we have, let's take another verse there. Eila Toldot Terach holidus Avraham. This is the generations of Terach. Terach had so and so and so and so, and they went on to live. Here these are the generations of Yitzchak. Now it doesn't say Yitzchak ben Avraham. It should be Ve'ela Toldot Yitzchak. Yitzchak holid as Yaakov and Esav, or I should say Esav and Yaakov, right? But so it's obviously right away off the bat, we are given you might call this a visual clue or a textual clue that something is amiss. That's something they want to draw your attention to the repetition of the name Avraham. Avraham is very much a presence in Yitzchak's life, whether physically, but certainly in his mind, shaping exactly who he is. And Yitzchak has a very complex relationship with Avraham. I mean, you can ask yourself, what do you think happened between Yitzchak and Avraham after the Akedah? Forget about during. Okay, during, you could be in shock and you're like, yeah, okay, by the way, remember that time? So, and he probably didn't take walks with his sons. I'm guessing Yitzchak didn't, because the last time he took a walk with his father, it didn't turn out very well. And by the way, it's called, the episode is called Akedat Yitzchak, even though the dominant player in that episode is Avraham. He's the main character in that narrative, and yet we call it Akedat Yitzchak. We're going to look at the text, and you're going to see some things that, if you haven't noticed before, are going to be really, really eye-opening. So let's now turn back. Oh, I'm in big trouble. My wife is coming on. I am big trouble. Oh my goodness. This is where I behave. Okay. So let's turn back to the story of the Akedah. So in the Akedah, okay, we know what happens. We know the story. Where everybody here is familiar with the story, right? Okay, God said, go kill your son. Sure, no problem, done. Oh, I didn't mean it. Yeah. So in the end of the Akedah is, okay, so this is, let's say, page 104. 104, okay? After the angel says, don't kill your son, he finds an animal. This is going to be important, by the way, an animal that's caught in the thicket, and he brings that. So Avraham calls this place, or whatever he calls it. An angel calls out to Avraham a second time. Now we're in pasuk that's about 15. Vayomer and 16. So the angel calls out to Avraham second time in the Shemayim. Vayomer, Bi nishpati nem Hashem kiyana asher asisa sedavar zeh lechasach lespinchas yichidecha ki varecha varechecha v'harba aber zaracha kavei Hashemayim v'chachol asher asvas hayam yiver zaracha eis sha'ar oivav v'hiz baruchu b'zaracha kol gei oretz ekev asher shamata b'koli. And the angel says, by myself, I swear the word of Hashem, because you've done this thing and have not withheld your son, your only one. that I will bless you and greatly increase your offspring like the stars of the heavens and the sand of the seashore, and your offspring shall be the earth against his enemy. And all the nations of the earth shall bless themselves by your offspring because you have listened to my voice. Okay? So if I had to ask you a question, a simple question, after this, after the Akedah, who was blessed after the Akedah?
Abraham, not Yitzchak.
Abraham. What happened to Yitzchak?
Nothing.
Well, let's read on. Let's see. Obviously, there's got to be something. I mean, you'd think that like the sacrificee, I don't know if that's a word, the offering, who, it takes two to tango. It does take two to make this happen. And you always have this image of sort of like Yitzchak holding his finger on the rope so Avram can tie the bow, like they do in the cartoons, when they're about to like tie a piece of TNT on the whatever, on the train tracks, and the guy's being tied, he holds his finger, like whatever. So that's the molding of my intelligence. There you show it, there you see it. So the next pasuk should tell us, Vayashav Avraham el Ne'arav, Vayekumu vayelchi yachdav el Beersheva, Vayeshev Avraham be'Beersheva. Avraham returns to Ne'arav. He returns to the two lads that were waiting 3 days journey away, wherever it was, and somewhere they, like we talked about, they made Daniel, maybe it was there, I don't know. And Avraham goes to Beersheba. So noticeably, there is a glaring omission right here. Avraham returns. Where is Yitzchak?
Who knows?
Where is he? He's what?
Who knows? He's still on the Akedah.
So Rashi tells us. It's not here, but Rashi tells us elsewhere that he went to yeshiva. Because of course that's what you do after you almost get shafted, you go back to yeshiva. It's the only safe place. I don't know, but I all those Rashi has to fill in the gaps, and the Mefarshim, it's so bothersome. But maybe what's happening is that is that Yitzchak never returns from the Akedah. That's the imagery that the Torah is giving us. Yitzchak is sort of stuck at the Akedah maybe his whole life. Maybe his whole life is now he's so traumatized by it. He's so, I don't know what, that first of all, his father left without him. I don't care where you're going, but his father left without him. Okay? And if you want to ramp this up a little bit, okay? We started the whole story. We always start. The rabbis always talk about the beginning of the story. They never talk about the end of the story. And the beginning of the story, isn't it beautiful? If you go back to page 100, and God says, "Go up," and what happens? They go to the place and they find and they see the place from afar, and He says, "You stay here." And it says, "Vayelchu shnehem yachdav." And then Yitzchak says to Avraham, he says, "Dad, I'm here." And he's like, we got all the stuff, but where's the animal? And the father says, "Oh, God will provide." And then a second time, Vayelchu shnehem yachdav. I mean, what a beautiful second day Rosh Hashanah speech. Vayelchu shnehem yachdav. We have to go together. We have to be together. They're on the same page. Yitzchak was on the same page as his father. And they have this imagery of the two of them walking together. And the story ends what? Avraham leaves. And who's Yelchu yachdav? He's Yelchu yachdav with the other ones. He's no longer Yelchu yachdav. There's no more walking together with Yitzchak. It's just Avraham and somebody else. Yitzchak is now levad. He's alone. Not only that, in the beginning of the commandment, what happens? God says, page 100, this very, very detailed description. Kachna es bincha, es yechidcha, asher ahavta, es Yitzchak. Take your son, your only son, the one that you love, Yitzchak. We know Rashi there tells us, he wasn't sure. He talked about Yishmael. No, it's Yitzchak, asher ahavta. But look at the bracha that's given at the end. It's so subtle, but it's so powerful that the angel says to him, in verse 12 on page 102, Pasuk Yud Beis, he says, "Don't do anything, because now I know that you fear God, because you didn't withhold your son, your only son." Again, it says in Pasuk Tezayin, "Vayomer bi nishpati Hashem ki yana asher asisa es hadavar hazeh lo chasachta es bincha es yechidecha." What's missing? There's no ahavta. What happened at the beginning? This beautiful narrative. Bincha yichidecha asher ahavta's gone. Twice it's gone. So
also it says yechidcha, meaning no Yishmael, like it's only recognizing Yitzchak as his only son.
Yeah, this is very Yitzchak centric. There's no question about it. And it's if the Torah is giving their stamp of covenantal approval on Yitzchak, and Yishmael sort of an also ran.
Yeah.
Which we will come back to, which very much defines. It's an excellent point, Rachel, and thank you for bringing that up. You're going to see how this is going to really play so much. Again, we're looking at the psyche as kind of a psychological analysis of Yitzchak post Akedah, post almost mortem. You would say, I don't know what you would say, but post this traumatic episode. So therefore, Abraham comes out of the Akedah with a very strong bond with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He has passed this major test. Most opinions think it's the 10th test. He doesn't know there were 10 tests, but this is the big one, right? He has this new bond. God promises him everything, right? But Yitzchak's relationship with Abraham is very much changed. There's no more yachtav. They're not together anymore. There's no more ahavta. Maybe if something has been severed, maybe there's some love lost. So therefore, when we come to the beginning of our parsha, and Yaakov and Esav are brought into the scene, you can't help but, kind of not blame Yitzchak for saying, oh, by the way, I have favoritism towards one and not the other. But why? But it doesn't say just that he liked one, he didn't like the other. It says he loves, what's his name? Esav, right? And, the names are very hard to remember. He loves Esav. Why? Kitzayed befiv. That's an important role, again, which the modern commentaries point out. The notion of tzayed is because what saved Yitzchak's life? Right? Hine ayel achar nachaz basvach bekarnov. Imagine the father's about to kill him, and the angel says, no, don't do it. And if you read the midrashim there are so powerful. And again, here's where I would quote my daughter, who says that my daughter in Israel, she likes to watch this. She does this like the next day. She gets the video, and she, instead of morning seder, she doesn't do like whatever boring stuff they're learning there. She watches my shiur. So it's like an interesting communication that we have. Like, it's nice to be able to learn with your children. And she swears that her take on it, and we've talked about this, is that Avraham failed the test. And that's why the Medrash actually intones and says, he just asked him, let me just nick him a little. Let me take a little blood. I mean, it's a very, very difficult episode to kind of, peel back the layers and see what's really going on. But the angel says, no, don't do it. And then finally, right away, the Torah says, we know that you fear God now. And then Abraham lifts up and he sees, okay, you know what? Instead of killing Yitzchak, I have a better solution. It's not like he stops. It's almost like, oh, now that I found a substitute, if you read the psukim carefully, right? The angel says, I'll teach the don't do it because I know. It doesn't say Abraham said, okay, I won't do it. No, the next thing is Vayisa. He lifts his eyes and he's distracted and he sees something else. Then he takes the ayil. Almost like he took it because it happened to be there, not because he was told not to kill Yitzchak. So Yitzchak, seeing that, his life is saved by what? By an animal. So he identifies sort of with this, let's bring an animal. An animal is what gives me life. So Yaakov and Esav is the one that feeds him. He identifies with Esav because he's so traumatized his whole life by this. And now you can't help but, you can't blame him for identifying more with Esav Kitzayed Befiv. Right? And it's interesting that the Torah goes out of its way to say that Kitzayed Befiv. We don't really necessarily spend so much time of Kitzayed Befiv. What does that mean? He ate. It wasn't like he had an eating problem and we're worried about his nutrition and Esav took care of him. No, there has to be something deeper. The fact that the Torah points out and says that he loves Esav Kitzayed Befiv. So Abraham leaves on a high. He has all these blessings from God. His relationship with his son Yitzchak is probably broken. And we don't see Yitzchak on the scene for quite some time. The next thing that happens is beginning of Chayes Sarah. Sarah dies. Where is Yitzchak involved in that scene? Not there.
Except that he's extremely distraught about it. And when Avraham dies, they don't talk about him crying and being extremely distraught. So there is his reaction to Sarah's death is very different than Avraham's death.
Right, but we don't see his reaction, do we?
Yeah, I think it says he cries a lot, and he was kind of.
No, we see that when he marries Rivka, that it says that he becomes consoled after her. Because isn't that what it's supposed to be? Every time you get married, that your wife is supposed to take the place of your mother. Isn't that the case? No, I'm just kidding, because that gets a lot of people in a lot of trouble.
Can't go there.
But in the narrative in the beginning of Chayei Sarah, when she dies, it says Vayakam Avraham me'al pnei mesa. Avraham gets up from the death. Avraham's the one that has to go purchase. Avraham is the one who buried her. Where's Yitzchak? He's not involved. And then, of course, the bulk of the parsha, as we discussed last week, the 67-verse interlude of finding a wife for Yitzchak, the person who is least involved in it is the main character of that narrative, is Yitzchak himself. He's not even there. Okay, so he's sort of this absentee thing. But this is where it gets really interesting. So let's look at the end in Chayei Sarah. Okay, and again, we're going to jump around here. Look at Pasuk Samech Beis. It should be in the bottom of page 118. Bottom of page 118. Okay, so it's Perek Chaf Daled, the 24th chapter, and the 62nd verse. The 62nd airborne is here. Okay, fine. So Rivka leaves finally after that whole, let me tell the story like 90 more times of what happened. She goes, Vatakam Rivka in Arasen 61. She goes on the whole entourage to go meet Yitzchak. And all of a sudden, only here in verse 62 do we hear from Yitzchak again. So it's not since the end of the Akedah, or the last we heard of Yitzchak is that he was lying on there and he got swapped out for a piece of meat. Only now we reintroduce to Yitzchak. We haven't heard a peep from him. We haven't heard anything about him or from him. Then it says, all of a sudden Yitzchak's back. Yitzchak ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i v'hu yoshev be'eretz hanegev. Yitzchak came from Be'er Lachai Ro'i because he was in the south of the country. Now, if I were to ask anybody a simple question, could you please translate that pasuk for me? Somebody please translate the pasuk without reading the Art Scroll translation. V'yitzchak, we know what that means. It's the next phrase that's really, really puzzling. Ba mibo be'er lachai ro'i. What does that mean? Anyone? Bueller? He came. So if I were asking you, so Alina is very, she has kids who live in Israel and she's so very good in Hebrew. I want to ask you, how do you say he came from the Be'er?
Hu ba mi be'er.
He ba mi be'er. What is ba mi bo?
From inside?
He what?
Not from inside. Mi bo?
No, he came.
From within?
He came. So the article writes, he came from having gone. It means literally, he came from coming. It's a very unusual phrase, right? Okay, so maybe what we have to look at, we're going to see this. This is very fascinating because a lot of the times we don't pay attention to names, we don't pay attention to places. Where is Be'er Lachai Ro'i? Be'er Lachai Ro'i. Well, it tells us, and he was in the Eretz HaNegev. He's in the south, so we know. Okay, Avraham, Beersheba, Hebron, whatever. Okay, south, Beersheba, Hebron, like a direct line. Straight up the spine of the country from the bottom. Again, that's Route 60. One day we're going to take a tour, right, Shelley? We're going to take a tour of Route 60 from top to bottom to top. No, that's Route 6. Route 60 is a little different. I'm just saying, a lot of people will go on Route 60 just because, it's kind of like some dicey neighborhoods. Anyway, I love it. Let's go and find out where, does anybody, does it ring a bell, Be'er Lachai Ro'i? Now, I wouldn't expect it to. It's not your most common. It's not like Be'er Sheva. It's not like this. So Be'er Lachai Ro'i, we have to go all the way back to chapter 16. Let's go back to chapter 16, verse 7. I'm sorry, 16:4. 16:4, Parshas Lech Lecha. We have lots of stuff going on. Avraham is promised. We have in chapter 15 is known as the Bris Bein HaBesarim, the covenant between the halves. God promises Avram everything, and he wakes up and he's like, I got nothing. I have no kids. I got no land. I got nothing. Okay. Then we're automatically told that, by the way, his wife, Sarai, not Sarah yet, she has no children. And she has this Egyptian maid named Hagar. Sarai says to Avram, listen, at least, go be with her and maybe you'll have kids through her. I can't give you kids right now. So at least go with her. And it says Abraham listens. Then what happens after, so then Sarai, Avram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian after 10 years of being in Canaan. He gave her to Avram, her husband, to as a wife, a concubine, whatever. Okay. Now, what happens in these stories, of course, the second that one can't have children, she says to another one, go have children with him. In 9 seconds, they have children. Okay. That's always the case, right? She has, Pasuk Daled, Vayavo El Hagar Vatahar, right? Right away, boom, not even half a sentence. She's pregnant. And then all of a sudden, as soon as she became pregnant, all of a sudden she gets a bit of an attitude, lowered in esteem, and etc. And she has a chip on her shoulder. You can understand. Sarai says to Abraham, the outrage against me is due to you. It was I who gave my maidservant into your bosom. When she saw that she had conceived, I became lowered in her esteem. Let Hashem judge between me and you. Now, there's a lot of critics. The Ramban also, we discussed a few weeks ago about being critical of the others. The Ramban says, that she didn't behave nicely here. And by the way, when God said to the Jewish people, you will be strangers in a strange land, he never said where. Never said where. Masa avasim labanim, the pre-enactment of what's going to happen is Mitzrayim. Why Mitzrayim? Because Hagar is from where? Hagar is from Mitzrayim. And because the Chassam Sofer says this is also, if I'm not mistaken, that because she mistreated an Egyptian woman, the payback was that they were mistreated by Egypt. Fascinating. Really fascinating. Anyway, she's like, now, poor Avram in this episode, he's like, you told me to do it. I did what you told me to do. All I'm doing is following directions, and now I'm in trouble. I don't know of a single husband that's ever experienced that ever, who did exactly what he was told and still got in trouble. It's never, ever happened, right, Miriam? Never. Huh? Yes. Thank you. So he says, let Hashem judge. And she's like, so Avram says, do what you want. So she dealt harshly and caused Hagar to run away. What happens? Hagar goes by the spring. An angel finds her, B'derech Shiur, and he's like, where are you coming from? She's like, I'm running away from my Sarah, my master. And he's like, listen, go back to her. Just submit yourself to her domination, it says. And the Malach says to Hagar, so Hagar gets banished. She's this Egyptian maidservant. And all of a sudden, angels are representing God talking to her. And the angel says, you're going to have great offspring. Don't worry about it. And you're going to have a son. You're going to call him Yishmael because God heard you. He's going to be a wild kind of guy. He's going to be all over the place. Okay. And look at page 72. Turn the page. Vatikra Shema Shema Doveri Lev Ata El Ra'i. Kirma Gam Alom Ra'i Zacharei Ra'i. And she said, the name of Hashem who spoke to her, you are the God of vision. She said, could I have ever seen here after having been seen? Al Kain Kara La Be'er Lachai Ra'i. So therefore, she calls that place, she calls this well, Be'er Lachai Ra'i. Hine Ben Kadesh Ubein Beret. It is between Kadesh and Beret. So here we have, this is the first banishment of Hagar, leading to the birth of Yishmael. And it's represented by a place where she is now revealed. An angel reveals God to her, and then she sees the light and she goes back and Be'er Lachai Ra'i. Now, what happens in chapter 21? In chapter 21, okay, in Ayera, Yitzchak is finally born, and what happens? Page 96, she doesn't like, we saw this last time, she doesn't like how Yishmael and Yitzchak are getting along. She doesn't like to influence what's happening. What does she do? Kicks him out. She says to Avram, get rid of her. Get rid of her, get rid of the kid. Again, he's like, he doesn't know what to do. God finally says, listen to her. She knows what she's doing. Okay. by the way, here, and the modern commentaries have also pointed out, by the way, chapter 21 immediately precedes, except with the little pack that we have in Gerar, which is not exactly, this alliance with Avimelech, but this is chapter 21, right before chapter 22. This is right before the parak of the Akedah. Many have called this chapter the mini Akedah, because what happens in the beginning, again, in on page 96, Vayashkem Avraham baboker. We have that in both instances. Avraham gets up in the morning. He's preparing to sacrifice one of his children, one of his sons. He's taking them out to the middle of nowhere. He goes and he sends them away. Where? Midbar Beersheva. And then what happens? The Hagar casts the child away, a bow shot away. She doesn't want to hear the crying, etc. And how does the story, what's the denouement of the story? What's the crux of the story? An angel calls out from heaven and says, don't do what you're doing. Vayikra malach Elokim el Hagar mineshama v'yamala malach Hagar al tiri ki shem Elokim es kol ne'ava asher hu sham. Don't go out. Don't do this. God will listen to you. God has heard you. Don't cast him away. Don't sacrifice your son. Save him. And all of a sudden, a well appears. Okay, so this is the second banishment of Yishmael, the second banishment of a sibling, a family member of Yitzchak. And by the way, there is a third banishment. Very, very subtly, it's the third banishment in the end of Chaye Sarah. Right after the let me find it. Okay. In chapter 25, page 120, after Sarah dies and after he finds a wife for Yitzchak, and after Rivka and Yitzchak get married, by Yosef Avraham vayikach, it's the end of Chayei Sarah. Yosef, I'm sorry, that Avraham, he adds on, it says he married a wife Ushma Keturah, and he married Keturah. Now, many people say that Keturah is actually Hagar. And it shows this sort of deep relationship that Avraham had with Hagar, not to take away from the one he had with Sarah, but he had a relationship with her. And it lists all the names. Okay. Look at Pasuk Hey. Vayitein Avraham es kol asher lo Yitzchak. Whatever he had, he gave to Yitzchak. V'livnei apilagshim asher Avraham nasan Avraham natanos. Vayishalchem me'al Yitzchak beno ba'odenu chai kedma el eretz kedem. He gave whatever he had to Yitzchak, but to the children of the concubine, these nameless, faceless characters who were Avraham's, he gave them gifts and then he sent them away. He sent them away, but not just away from Yitzchak. Now again, the Torah is charting for us that the prodigal son, the covenantal heir is Yitzchak, but Yitzchak is surrounded by his father sent away Yishmael, not once but twice. Well, she was pregnant with Yishmael, or right before he was born. Got rid of him before he was born. Got rid of him a second time, and he knows this. And his father was ready to sacrifice him. So I'll read you the quote from the book, what Rabbi Klitzner writes, and he says, "It is psychological territory, unresolved trauma of banishment of brothers. The symbolic location of Avraham and Sarah's preference for Yitzchak over half-brothers." Okay? This is what, so therefore, when it says, Ba'im bo be'er l'chai ro'i, when he comes coming from be'er l'chai ro'i, in other words, the place where he could sort of collect himself and figure out how to deal with this, he goes to be'er l'chai ro'i. It may not be a physical place, but he goes to that state. That state of realizing that he himself was almost sacrificed, his half-brother was banished, his other half-brothers were sent away, okay? And therefore, and we have another instance of the pasuk of Be'er L'chai Ro'i, okay? Look at the end of chapter 25, in the end of that first paragraph. He sends them away. And then we were told of the death of Abraham. By the way, Chayei Sarah, we focus on the death of Sarah. We're not told that Abraham dies, but he dies in this pasuk also. That mirrors kind of these bookends of the parsha of Eila Chaye Sarah, Yemesh, Chaye Sarah, Sheva Shanim, and here we have a very similar. He lives 175. He dies. Zakein v'Saveya. He's like everything's all hunky dory. Yitzchak and Yishmael bury him, which is interesting. Also, the two of the brothers come back together. Where in Machpelah cave, where Shama Kubar Avraham Sarvishta. That's where Avraham and Sarah are buried. Look at the last pasuk of this paragraph. Another unusual verbiage here. That after he dies, after his father dies, where does Yitzchak go? God blesses Yitzchak, and Yitzchak dwells where? Not be'er l'chai ro'i, not eitzel be'er. It's im be'er l'chai ro'i. He dwells with be'er l'chai ro'i, which is a very, very. In other words, almost the saying is like when Abraham dies, all that Yitzchak is left with is sort of this trauma of be'er l'chai ro'i. He has this unresolved situation in his life where his father tried to kill him, and his father sent away his brother, and his father sent away everyone else. And all I'm left with is in be'er l'chai. If you would ask yourself, what is it that Yitzchak wants? All Yitzchak wants is he wants Avraham to love him. That could be like, it could be very like sort of flowery like that, but meaning to transfer the covenantal blessing to him. Yitzchak blesses his sons. Yaakov blesses his sons. Avraham does not bless his son. And if you look carefully, read this pasuk we just read again, look what it says after he dies. And what happens? It's Vayivarech Elokim es Yitzchak beno. It doesn't say that God blessed Yitzchak. It could just say God blessed Yitzchak. Why does it have to say Yitzchak beno? It's as if to say that who's giving Yitzchak the covenantal blessing? Not Avraham, it's God himself, because Avraham didn't do it. And that's something that Yitzchak wanted, okay? Rashi even points this out here. Rashi, it's the third line of Rashi, if you have it in front of you, in the right column. God blessed him, he gave him the comfort of mourners. Davar Acher, another opinion, he quotes from the Tanchuma. Even though God gave the covenantal blessings to Abraham, he was afraid to give them to Yitzchak because Abraham was afraid because he saw that he would have an Esav. So Rashi tells us from the Medrash that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God himself, had to replace Abraham. He had to take the place of Abraham, and he had to bless Yitzchak because Avraham wouldn't do it. So you can imagine if you add already to the psychological baggage that Yitzchak has, and this brother's gone and that brother's gone, all these things, and what happens? He can't even get the blessing from his father. Where does he go? God gives him the blessing. Now, he's longing for this bircha, this bracha of Avraham. Now, if we go into the episode of our parsha with Yitzchak blessing Esav, blessing Yaakov, why it's such a big deal. First of all, what's the first thing that he asks for before he blesses his son? What does he ask for from Esav before he blesses him? He wants a meal. But what? He says, go out to the field and hunt. There we go. Kitzayid b'fiv. He wants to go to sort of his comfort zone. He wants to go to his place of where he can sort of think that's the only, maybe his safe place. That's where I feel saved because it was the animal that saved his life. So I find comfort. I'm going to give the blessing. I have to be in a place sort of mentally or emotionally, psychologically, where I can give over blessing. But what's interesting is look at chapter 28, verse 4. Now, this will jump out off the page like nobody's business, okay? So this is, by the way, so the beginning of chapter 28, this is after the whole trick of Esav, and he realizes that Yaakov was pretending to be Esav. And what does he do now? I don't know about you, but if like one of my kids pulled a shtick like this, they would be smart to like run the other way and I wouldn't call them in and say, oh, by the way, let me bless you again. So it just goes to show you, and we have Rav Hirsch's commentary here who says, what Rivka was trying to do was she was right, whatever. Okay, but sometimes being right doesn't mean that you're right. Okay, but we're not studying the brachos. But he calls in Yitzchak again. This is, and some say that maybe this is the real blessing that Yitzchak wanted to give Yaakov. So he calls Yaakov and he blesses him, and he says, "Don't take a woman from Canaan. Go to Padan Aram, and take a woman from there, from my family." And look at Pasuk Gimel. V'kel shakai v'reichas chavya v'chavya becha v'hayisa lekahal amim, and God will bless you there, and you'll be fruitful, and you're going to become a great nation. And look at the next word of Pasuk Dalet. If it doesn't like jump off the page and hit you in the face, like nothing will. V'yitain lecha es birkas Avraham, and God will give you the bracha of Avraham to you and to your generations. So Yitzchak is giving over to Yaakov that which he longed for, that which he never received directly from Abraham. He got it from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So if we put all of this together, and again, the linchpin of this whole episode is found in a place of a location, Be'er Lachai Roi. Be'er Lachai Roi, that's where Yitzchak is coming from. His father left him. His mother died. He's not a part of it. He's not a part of finding his own wife. Finally, he comes to Be'er Lachai Roi, which represents sort of his place of, that's where he lives right now. He's still at the Akedah. He never left the Akedah. We're never told that he left the Akedah. He's coming. Why? Because he's Be'er Lachai Roi. That means he's like got all this unresolved trauma. And you can understand why when it comes to favoring one son, it's Kitzayid Befiv, because that's the only thing that sort of gives him sort of a sense of understanding what's right in his world. He never received the unconditional love in his mind from his father. Okay, why? So what happens? It's Avraham Holidus Yitzchak. The parsha begins. What is Yitzchak's life defined by? It's defined by how it was shaped by Avraham. Okay, so the story continues. We have two more brothers who don't get along. Two more brothers where the parents struggle about giving them equal attention. And maybe Yitzchak is overcompensating for Esav because he knows exactly what Esav is. To him, he's looking at Esav as kind of like his Yishmael. And what does he not want to happen to Esav? He doesn't want him to get banished like I've seen people get banished in my lifetime. So he's overcompensating for Esav. And the irony is, by the way, is that Rivka doesn't understand this. Rivka does not understand where he's coming from. She doesn't understand the trauma that he has experienced. She has her own issues to deal with, but she just sees things sort of black and white. Yaakov good, Esav bad. And you could even say that about your own children. So Esav is struggling to hold on. Yeah, Yitzchak is struggling to keep him in the fold. And Rivka totally does an end around, messes up the whole thing. Esav wants to kill his brother. And by the way, where does Esav end up? Who does he marry? We're told in the parsha, he marries from the daughters of Yishmael. It goes right back to where it started. The one thing that Yitzchak was trying to prevent happening to Esav, becoming another Yishmael, the Torah almost tells us as if, you know what? He becomes another Yishmael, another casualty sort of these fractured families, okay? So when Yitzchak wants to give his bracha, he goes back to his point of relief, which is Sayed, which is, what saved him. What caused all this confusion? They said that he's blind. And what does Rashi tell us? It says, Yitzchak v'tichenam einav miraos in this week's parsha Toldot. Why was Yitzchak blind? So Rashi, if you look, it's an unbelievable Rashi. And again, it's not necessarily meant to be taken literally, although some may disagree with that. When he gets right before the episode of the blessings, and that's why he calls them in. Again, page 134. It says Yitzchak was old and he became his eyes dim from seeing. Rashi says, "Ba'ashnan shel elu." First of all, that from his daughters-in-law that Esav took from married from these Hittite women, whatever, and they were always like burning incense in the house, whatever it was. Okay, in other words, sometimes the daughter-in-laws make you go blind. I don't know. I wouldn't know about that. But the next thing, Rashi says, Davar acher kishenekar agabe hamizbeach v'haya aviv rotze lishachto. Very strong language. When he was bound on the altar, and his father wanted to slaughter him, lishachto. The angels themselves were crying. And their tears. Now, I don't think this is literal. I don't think that angels actually cry. I don't know that angels actually have tears. But what is it saying? Is that he became blind. He couldn't see. His reality became altered because of his experience at the Akedah. Because of what happened to him at the Akedah, it then became, he didn't become, and this is Yitzchak, and Yitzchak had Esav and Yaakov. He became Yitzchak, the son of Abraham. Abraham begot Yitzchak. Oh, and by the way, they had these sons. What's Yitzchak? He's defined by Be'er L'chai Ra'i. He's defined by the only safe place he has is with food. Food because he was replaced by an animal. That's what saved his life. Yitzchak, who's the most uninvolved character, and he doesn't say very much character at all to anything. He hardly says anything in the whole Chumash. He's one of the Avos. And what is it? He's now in the center of this whole ruse, this whole scheme that Rivka puts together. And they have a very troubled relationship, you can imagine. I wouldn't want to be sort of at their kitchen table after this incident, but he's Fatihene Meros. Maybe, maybe some, I don't know, maybe a good therapist would have been able to like bring this out and dig down and find all of his unresolved trauma. But this is definitely a way to look at this episode. But what it does is it ties together for us so many different parts of, as I said, Lech Lecha, Vayera, Chayesara, Toldos, giving us an understanding of Yitzchak, who so little is mentioned directly about in the Chumash, but plays such an important role in how he was formed and how the formation of the future generations and his being the tie from one covenantal generation to the third covenantal generation, that wouldn't happen without Yitzchak. All found in Be'er L'chai Ra'i. I'm telling you, it's such a beautiful insight, I think, into how this works. So spend time thinking about it. Look through the psukim, and you'll see exactly how that works. And it kind of gives you maybe a better understanding, because again, you can't say that somebody just, and this is me talking, you can't say that somebody went through an experience of the Akedah and was just like, okay, I'm fine. I'm sorry. I don't care who you are. You can't just say, I'm fine. Yeah, my dad tried to kill me. It's no problem. It's okay. No, we're fine. My dad tried to run me over with the car. No, I got out of the way. Fine, that's fine. There has to be lingering effects, and the Torah does not hesitate to point out these things to you, where they started yachtav and they went separately. They left separately. Yitzchak maybe never left, or he's no longer called Asher Ahavta, the son that you loved. It's impossible, even if you're following the will of God, to want to shecht your son and still say Asher Ahavta, and ask yourself that question. If God himself, the Chod of Atzma, came to you and asked you to do that, would you do it? Me, the answer is no. I could tell you that. I mean, there are times when God doesn't ask me to do it and I feel like doing it. That's a whole other question. But you feel like you want to shecht your kids. But the actual, to me, and again, this in my mind, if God, and he hasn't spoken to me in a couple of weeks, but if God would come, God would come to me and say, this is what I want you to do, I would have a really hard time doing it, and I don't think I could. Or let's say kill even anybody else. I don't know. It's hard. It's very hard. These are very difficult parshas to understand, but hopefully this gives us a bit of an insight sort of into the persona, the psyche of the Avos, which you can really go to town on again. But and it's not based on like, babble that, just we get from some text. We're looking at the text of the Chumash itself, and Rashi and the Midrashim that tell us exactly to these cues. The key is you have to take these visual cues, these textual cues and clues, put them together, kind of give yourself a picture. You can't look at it one parsha at a time, one paragraph at a time. As I always say, you have to have the macro view. And by doing so, we'll do that. So next week, we'll get into some more fun dynamics with, we have Yaakov and the kids, and Yaakov and his many wives and his family dynamics. So all good stuff. Anyway, I hope everybody has a great day. Don't forget to vote. I voted like 6 times already. So I hope that, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that today is the 8th yahrzeit of Sam Halpern, Shmaryo, and Mordechai Dov. His neshama should have an aliyah, which we'll have learned in his memory. Again, his neshama should have an aliyah, should have simchas in shul. I was very privileged to have known him, albeit for too short of a time. But today is the yahrzeit. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.